long, long ago when the Celtic Underground podcast was just a toddler, Eddie Pearson used to do joint podcasts with the Homeboys. In more recent times, with the number of Celtic fan podcasts outstripping the number of things in the Rangers trophy room, I know that wouldn't be hard. Organising these sorts of things has been slightly more difficult. However, very recently, the very nice boys at the Huddlebreakdown came knocking on our door and suggested that we do a joint podcast. So this is part one of a very special offering. Part two is over on the Huddlebreakdown. Don't worry, everything is free across both platforms, so you don't need to then become a subscriber, but we'd love you to become a member of the Celtic Underground community in whichever way you want to do that. Anyway, this is a 2-hour-long podcast. It's got Alan, Duco James in the Huddlebreakdown. It's got Eddie, it's got Ross, it's got myself, Harry Brady, and very briefly it's got Andrew before we pulled the plug because he was too busy falling out with people, or he just didn't have very good Wi-Fi on his holiday. Anyway, this is part one. As soon as you've listened to this, jump across to the Huddlebreakdown feed and you can listen to part two because we leave you on a cliff edge. But this is enough of me. This is the Celtic Underground guys with the Huddlebreakdown boys.
Hi, welcome along. So, listen, special collab today. A clashing of podcasts, which normally isn't allowed in the Celtic internet. Normally, we have to be sitting in different corners, being snidey at each other and throwing, rough phrases at each other across social media. So anyway, it's summer. It's reasonably quiet in the transfer window. The season first game hasn't started yet, so I thought it'd be a great idea to get the guys from Celtic Underground, who obviously I'm great admirers of, one of the longest running football podcasts going, to join up with James and I. To do a special, no holds barred, anything goes, all that. Welcome to Brian, to Ross. We're hoping that Andrew Smith can rejoin us from his holiday in Sorrento. I think he said he was in, and also Eddie Pearson in his little black hole, which you'll understand when he comes on. So yeah, listen, guys, thanks for doing this. It's hopefully going to be a bit of fun for everybody. Let's get straight into it. We're here to talk about Celtic. I want to talk about, first thing I'm going to throw at you is Brendan Rodgers, right? One of my fears for this season is that we're going to have this long-running soap opera about Brendan Rodgers. Will he sign a new contract? Won't he? And it'll just go on and on and on. It'll become tedious and we'll all hate it and what have you. So what are your thoughts? Brendan Rodgers, should he be looking to extend his contract? Should we say, thank you, those 3 years have been great, let's move on? What are your thoughts? I'm going to go to Brian first.
Anytime there's a decision maker at Celtic that I've spoken to a few times about Brendan Rodgers' contract, and I said, you do know that once you get to this summer, all the press will want to talk about will be, is Brendan Rodgers going to renew a contract, and it will just have a tick down clock. And every time I've mentioned that to him, he's just smiled and said, well, it's a good job I know what's happening. I don't think he does. I really don't think he does. My best informed guess would be that it's 50-50 whether he extends a contract, has another contract beyond this year's termination. And a lot of that will be determined. He came back, look, he's won doubles and he's won trebles and won a couple of doubles now. He came back for European football. So what will determine as to whether he gets supported enough in this transfer window that he can move on from being 30 seconds away from beaten Bayern Munich in the Champions League. If he thinks he's been given the resources to do that, I think he'll extend. And if he thinks that, the famous phrase within Celtic Park is that we're a club of evolution, not revolution. And if he thinks that the evolution is just moving too slowly, I think he'll say, well, I've done my nearly 6 years at Celtic and that's been good enough and thanks very much.
What would you like to see happen, Brian?
I'd love him to stay.
Okay.
I can't see us getting a manager any better than Brendan Rodgers. I had a conversation, remember Paul Thompson, who did the Buy Them In podcast with Lawrence Donegan. And a shout out to Lawrence Donegan. By the way, shout out to Lawrence Donegan's son today, who is in final qualifying for the Open as an amateur. And he finished 8th. If he'd finished in the top 5, he'd have qualified for the Open. He was 1 shot off being tied for a playoff for 5th and 2 shots off actual direct qualification. So that's Niall Shields Donegan, one of the top amateurs in the world, apparently. So he nearly did that.
Brian, you just saved me from falling out with Lawrence because I texted him last week and I haven't heard from him yet. So he's been busy. I was hoping.
Yeah, he's been busy. Niall was playing in Sweden last week and Dundonald Links today. So, but I remember Paul and I had an interview. We did a podcast with Peter Lawwell.
I remember that.
And
ages ago.
I think I'm able to tell tales out of school now because it's a wee bit on. And I had, off the podcast, I said to Peter Lawwell that I thought that our experience of managers had proved that having an elite manager works at Celtic. That our experience of, we paid for the best in Martin O'Neill and we got to Seville. Gordon Strachan was a reasonable English Premiership, bottom half of the English Premiership level manager, and he did as well in the Champions League. We then went to Tony Mowbray, who'd been good at Hibs, and he didn't. We then went to Ronnie Dyler, who was a young rookie manager and didn't. And then when we went back to Brendan Rodgers, once again, we were able to perform in European football. And so I said what that demonstrated to me was if we paid the price for the best quality manager we can afford, it would be reflected in our performances on the pitch in European football. Peter was less agreeable with me on that than my point. But that's my... That's why I want to keep Brendan Rodgers as long as we can, because people will come to Celtic because they can see that Brendan Rodgers will enhance their career, and well, we saw what he did last season. So I'd be delighted if he stayed, but I genuinely think it's 50-50.
So does anyone have a contrary view to that, or at least a less effusive, supportive view, in hoping that Rodgers stays on for more than 2 years? Go for it.
I don't. I'm in agreement with Brian. I mean, I think I don't know who's next in the Dermot Desmond Rolodex if Rodgers leaves. I just, but particularly with the landscape for European football, with what's going on with the coefficient and Celtics coefficient in Europe, and just the risk of, Champions League becoming a difficult hill to climb. I just think it's going to be harder and harder. And really, I mean, Ange was kind of a weird situation that we kind of lucked into, and Rodgers kind of a sentimental, I would argue, reason that he probably came back. I don't think, given without his connection to the club, I'd be shocked if he would have revisited the job. So I just struggle to. I worry what tier that we would be recruiting from. When you have the manager as God model, and all of a sudden you're shopping in the discount rack, that could be really kind of scary, or overpaying for mediocrity.
But don't forget that things have been different. There wouldn't have been Ange, and there would have been Eddie Howe. And I don't think any of us would disagree that Eddie Howe would have done what Ange did. He might have even surpassed Ange in some ways in the way that he would have approached European football. So they are shopping in a certain tier that, when you think about the last 3 managers then, or 3 would-be managers, you would take any one of them. Postecoglou, Howe, Rodgers. So they're getting more right than wrong, I would suggest, with their manager ID.
Yeah, I would actually disagree with you, Andrew. I'll be the first, shockingly, that I'll be the first asshole here. I have to live up to brand. I don't think Eddie Howe would have done what Ange did, in the sense that I think the domestic landscape would have been a lot more perilous, because I think a big part of why Ange succeeded, well, there's 2 big reasons. One was that domestic clubs could not handle his style of play, and we just basically suffocated them once we kind of got going and through that initial few months. That's the dual edge of the sword, though, is it made us completely vulnerable in Europe. And I never thought we were ever going to compete in Europe under Ange because his style of play, unless he pulled what he did at Tottenham and all of a sudden his job was on the line and
Yeah, I
he
know.
needed that
I know.
trophy. Yeah. So if we kept going to the Bernabeu and playing Ange ball in perpetuity, that was never going to work out. So I think if we would have gotten in the Champions League, I agree with you. But the problem is, I don't think look at Bournemouth. Bournemouth haven't suffered since Howe left. In the contrary. And I'm not saying Howe's a bad manager, but I question whether or not our recruitment, because a big part of the reason why we were good, it was the nexus of the recruitment that Ange brought, not because we had great recruitment structure, but because he knew guys in Japan, basically. And we peeled off 3 really good players from Japan at really cheap prices because that market was and still is underpriced globally. And Howe would have probably been shopping out of the ridiculous English market. And we would have been, getting kind of championship leftovers, which has kind of been, which we're seeing that's where Rangers are shopping right now with the new regime. I mean, that's kind of the bracketing from a financial perspective. So that's why I think we lucked into Ange, not because of any kind of strategic situation. It was because of how he played his style of football. And, we picked off 3 incredible players for basically almost free because of the market dynamics.
Okay. So I come back to one of my favourite sort of bits of wise words that Gordon Strachan said was this notion that, a manager has really got a 3-year lifespan. And by end of 3 years, the players have pretty much heard everything that they have to say. They've seen all the motivational tropes. They've heard all the stories. They've seen all the tweaks. That's your kind of window really for making an impact on players and moving things forward. And of course, for very sad reasons, mainly around the passing of poor Tommy Burns. He actually stayed for 4 years and didn't actually follow his own advice, and that 4th year was an absolute train wreck, as we know. So part of me sort of thinks, should Rodgers be following that maxim? Should we be following that maxim with Rodgers and say he's had his 3 years, he'll have made his impact, it's time for a new voice, it's time for a new and actually then shouldn't it be, contrary to what you said, Brian, if Celtic are a club where young players develop, shouldn't it also be a club where the next set of elite managers cut their teeth at a big club, but without the pressure of a top 5 league, a top 6 of the EPL, that kind of thing. So part of me, I'm not saying I'm averse to Rodgers staying on. I've just got a little bit of doubt in my mind. I can see there's another side to this. Another thing, couple of things I'll throw in that I pulled out in the article that I did today on our site is, just some of the tactical decisions. I don't think he treated the young players well last year. I think it was ridiculous, some of the way that they were used. I don't think that's a sacking offence particularly. It's just not. It's a bit off-brand for me in terms of what we believe that Rodgers brings to this. And the other thing was just some of the tactical missteps along the way. The failure to really work out a way to beat a very poor Rangers side playing very agricultural football, though under Clement they actually started to play quite smart against Celtic. I don't know why they sacked him, and actually, we're getting the better of Celtic in key games, frankly, and he never kind of changed anything to combat that. And that's a bit of a flag for me. So I'll throw that out there as reasons why maybe 3 years is enough. Ross, what do you think?
I'll chime in and say I really don't care if he stays or goes.
Okay.
And for a lot of the reasons that you've just discussed there, and that James threw in regards to, the only fear you would have is who's next and who's in the Celtic WhatsApp contact list. Some people recently have obviously talked about the fact that Maloney's returned, and would there be a possibility of a Sean Maloney, John Kennedy sort of setup, which would be, in my opinion, terrifying. But bear with me for 2 seconds. I've had a little interruption. I think we're okay. So I don't mind whether he stays or goes, because I think when he left the first time, sorry, excuse me, I'm going to mute for 1 second.
It's all right.
No worries.
Eddie, what's your thoughts on while Ross is sorting his domestic out? What's your thoughts on Brendan?
So sorry, I've have an issue for us that my Wi-Fi's been coming and going. So my big question is, have I missed all the Rod Stewart of Glastonbury chat already, or are we keeping that for a bit later?
Yeah, well, that's for later.
Just to get a vibe, just so I know what the tone of our approach.
Yeah, when we run out of serious football stuff to talk about,
Before we
run out of serious football stuff,
Before we started recording, James and Andrew were having a Neil Young love-in, so they went straight beyond Rod, straight to Neil Young and Bob Dylan.
We can have a conversation later about the backing singers if we don't want to talk about that just now. That's fair enough, right? But the thing for me about Rodgers is that I think there are folk who are looking for, I don't know, beyond what we should reasonably be expecting in terms of the league that we're playing in. Whether we can reasonably expect better as a manager in a different league, that would be a different argument. But given the environment we are operating in and the calibre of manager that we will be able to attract to come and play against Ross County or Livingston or Motherwell for longer than a season, and they might come not really knowing what Dens Park looks like or what Tannadice looks like, and after a year I think, nah, not for me. And 10 Champions League games, 12 Champions League games isn't going enough to keep them at the club. So the fact that we have a manager of the calibre of Rodgers currently at the club just now, I don't think that we will get anything better than that. Tactically, he's doing enough. Sometimes it gets a wee bit dull. I accept that. Sitting in the stands and watching it, sometimes you can think this is getting a bit horseshoey. I don't disagree. We don't play enough penetrating balls for my liking when Hattai's on the team. But overall, and maybe this is more of a vibes thing rather than a statistical analysis of it, but I think that the leadership that Rodgers has given us and the understanding that he has of the club and the understanding that he has of what the fans want, I think we've got a lot of things there that another manager is not going to be able to give us and not going to be able to pray for us. And on that basis, I would be looking for him to stay longer. I do think that there has to be maybe a regeneration in terms of the tactics behind the scenes. The idea that Ferguson was at Old Trafford as long as he did, but he kept changing his assistant manager, because I do think that players get bored hearing the same voices, and yeah, a manager only has so many tricks. Like any leader in any organisation, eventually they're just doing a retread of what they've done before. But the trick with there is to bring other voices into that conversation. If we keep them beyond the 3 years, and I'd like to think that we will, I think we need to bring newer voices into the conversation, onto the training ground, to keep things fresh for the players that are going to be staying there beyond his 3-year cycle. I don't disagree with what Strachan said. You won't hear me agree with Strachan about much, but I don't disagree with what Strachan said initially about the idea that 3 years is an intense spell to have at a club like Celtic or like Rangers, because the demands are so high and the expectations are so high. But I think you can offset that by allowing the manager to move slightly back a wee bit, become more of a figurehead, make match day decisions, but have everybody else doing the heavy lifting Monday to Friday, so he only comes in at the tail end of it. A bit like Martin O'Neill did. Martin O'Neill survived 5 years and could have comfortably survived a few more if not for his domestic circumstances. I think he would have stayed and he would have been successful. But you need somebody else behind the scenes to be doing something different if you're going to keep the same man in charge.
I didn't expect Eddie to have the knives out for John Kennedy. That's coming out of nowhere, Eddie. What man?
I go in 2-footed, straight on. None of this nonsense, pussyfooting around. If we're not going to talk about Rod Stewart, I'm going to go straight for Kennedy. Stick a boot in.
We'll get there. I can only be serious for so long. We'll get there. Listen, I am getting a little bit of the vibes of, well, we'll keep Rodgers because we don't trust them to make a good decision about who to replace it with, which is just like the worst reason to keep any manager. I'm picking up a little bit of that, but listen. So okay, I think we've got reservations, but I think we don't trust the club to probably.
But there's no reservations for me. I think Rodgers is brilliant. I love Brendan Rodgers.
Yeah. Yeah, and listen, he brought a consistency of play last season that. You can say, oh, it's dull. You can talk about horseshoes, but that style of football is perfect for beating the style of football that we come up against week on week in the SPFL. And the team were so consistent, week after game after game after game, one defeat up to the end of February in the league, whilst playing Champions League football, and that was it. The season was done at that point. And people look at that and say, oh, yeah, but, we grinded out these 2-0s and 1-0s and it wasn't always scintillating. Yeah, but his job is to win the league. So, I get all that as well. And I think he's very good at that. We'll move on. I'm going to bring Ross in first here because I want to move on to the recruitment that we've seen so far in the summer. I saw Chris Sutton's piece about, Celtic are going to have to hurry up and they're moving so slowly. And I thought, well, we didn't sign anyone until the 16th of July last summer. And by the end of June, we'd signed, 4 players plus a youth player. So I think that's a little bit harsh. I'm not saying that Celtic are perfect. I'm not saying the recruitments couldn't be better. Of course I'm not. I'm just saying that particular criticism seemed a bit odd to me. But I'm more concerned not so much about the speed of recruitment, more about what the players that we've brought in is telling us about in this new world where, if we look back to last year, Mark Lowell left in March. Paul Tisdale, head of football operations, didn't start his role formally. I know he was informally, doing doctor football stuff kind of during that summer, but he didn't formally start until the October, which meant that last summer, I think we can safely say was a Brendan Rodgers transfer window. And I don't want to go backwards. I'm trying to look forwards here. But this summer, Tisdale's in place. So this is Tisdale football operations transfer window, right? I think we can all get behind that. So, we've brought in Kieran Tierney on a Bosman from Arsenal. Ross Doohan is the third choice backup, effectively the Scottish-born tickboxer exercise to replace Scott Bain. Benjamin Nygren from Nordjylland, and Callum Osmond from Fulham as a young striker. What are these signings telling us about the way that Celtic's football operation might be evolving under Tisdale, or isn't it? Is it the same old worries that we have before, Ross?
Can I deflect to Brian to start with, because he has a better understanding of Paul Tisdale's role than I do, and then I will happily cover the player
something
elements.
to do with my VPN and all this kind of stuff, a firewall or something.
What our understanding of what Paul does.
Excuse me?
Within the club.
Where's the doctor?
Do you think I could try it up there?
Well, so, and a couple of things I'd say. Firstly, the reason Ross is saying that is I was at the famous fan forum where the Green Brigade sat at the back of the room with their arms folded in a grumpy mood until they could talk about tifos. And for the first 45 minutes, Paul Tisdale did a presentation. What does that
mean, Jamie, about the VPN and all that?
And again, spoken to people inside Celtic, and seems a really nice guy. So I would say 30 minutes of his 45 minutes was actually about youth, which Ross can speak about at great length, was about the youth and what he's been looking at youth. And the emphasis was really, that's what his bulk of his time has been to date. And he's really only just looking at the transfer side of things. I asked a number of questions then afterwards. The reason why Ross has said the first to me, because he then came up to me and said, "Great shoes, love your shoes." And I'm asking him questions about football, and he's asking me questions about my shoes. Where'd you get your shoes? No, I have no idea. I mean, they're sort of almost Doc Martin style blue with red stitching in them, right? And he's asking me all these questions about the shoes, and I'm saying, well, enough of the shoes. Can we please get back onto how the cooperation agreement coaching system's going to work with players out? So that's why Ross is saying defer to me. I would say last summer's transfer. Are we allowed to swear on your?
Sure.
Yeah.
So last summer's transfer window was a clusterfuck.
And you say that? It's swearing.
I'm more concerned about Ross's young children beavering about in the background there.
And because Adamida was sitting on the board's table at a £4 to £6 million deal until the last week of the transfer window. And so I don't blame Adamida for the overpricing there. Arne Engels was sitting on the boards, well, not the board, to be fair. Arne Engels was sitting on the Dermot Desmond sign-off table for 6 weeks at £6 million. And then we get to the last week of the transfer window, and then Brendan's about to chuck the rattle out of the pram because all other alternative signing propositions for midfield had gone. So it was Engels or nobody. Same with centre-half. Centre-half was, there must be somebody we can find to place it left-sided centre-half in the last week of the transfer window, and we go for Trusty. So actually, I wouldn't put the blame at Brendan's door. I would put the blame wholly at Dermot's door for taking ages to... My understanding is that Dermot is... Here's one for you, James. Dermot is in the Donald Trump world of negotiating principle. So my understanding is that Dermot believes if you leave everything to the very last minute, you can get a better deal. And his evidence for that is the amount of times that we've sold players where we've held off, like Kieran Tierney. Arsenal were £18 million for weeks. And then they, I think, had European football. And they came in and suddenly went up £7 million to 25. So Dermot lives in that world of negotiating. Problem is, he forgets that also works the other way around. And we went to 2 clubs in the last week of the transfer window who knew that we had no other option on striker in Ida, and we had no other option in midfield in Engels, and then paid over the top. So that's the context, I would say, for going into this window. And I do wonder whether the reason we're shopping at the £1 to £3 million level is because it requires less sign-off from Dermot. Yeah. That's my guess, completely ill-informed guess. So that's the context of Dr. Football likes my shoes. Ross, you can now carry on from there.
Can I just interrupt to say, so your shoes were red, white and blue?
Yeah.
No, there's no white.
That's a big concern. Right?
There's no white. They're blue with a red stitch and red laces and a sort of quite a...
One of the Green Brigade were going for you at that meeting. No wonder they were looking out for you. The enemy within. You can spot them by their shoes a mile off.
Blue brogues with red stitching.
You will know them by their brogues.
Anyway, he likes my shoes. Yeah, that's good enough. Remember, the coaching staff likes my shoes. Right, Ross.
That's totally flung me. I think my biggest thing with recruitment, and I listen to a lot of what James has put out, and I've read a lot of the sort of analysis that he's done of the various players, and a lot of it I think we're in agreement with. I think the biggest problem I have with Celtic's recruitment, and it's not just this year or last year, you probably go back the last 6-7 years, there's no design to anything. There's no consistency to anything. It's one year it seems to be heavily data orientated, but they've never looked at the players. So it's just like 23-24, where we signed a lot of players who, within their leagues and within their teams, were doing really, really well at what they were good at. But you put them in a Celtic team that's totally different, and they fall down. Then we have the season where Ange came in, and Ange obviously had a very specific idea and had a very clear idea of what he was going to take from Japan and then what he wanted in other players. And we've done that, and so that was the Ange transfer window. Then we're saying last summer is more Brendan, although the board have kind of messed it up in terms of how late they left things. So every season is something different instead of a structured design that you would see at the sort of teams who are doing it well, the Brentfords, the Bournemouths, Brightons, all these teams who are doing recruitment incredibly well, their design's consistent. Ours is just, throwing darts at a wall and seeing what we come up with. So as much as there are some of the players from this summer that I like the look at Callum Osmond. I liked what I've seen of what I could get of him from Fulham. I liked the things that I heard, and I believe, Alan, you said you spoke to someone who was at Fulham and got some information about Callum. Most of what I've seen was a reflection of what you had put in one of your podcasts recently. So I like Callum Osmond as a player, but there's the part of me that goes, where does he fit? I love Nygren as a player, but I'm looking and going, is Nygren going to be the Nygren that I love watching just now in a Celtic team? Because he's not a right winger who's going to dart to the line. And I know Nicholas Kuhn doesn't dart to the line all that often, but Nygren never does it. He is edge 18-yard box inside. He's a goal scorer. It's more Lil Abada type, likes to make his diagonal runs into the box and get his goals. He's not overly creative in terms of what he brings as a wide player. And some people would say, well, he'll play number 10. But again, he's a goal-scoring, attacking player. The Japanese players who look like they're going to come later this week, I have to be brutally honest, and the articles are up on Celtic Underground, I am unconvinced to quite the point where I'm just going, again, I don't understand the design. I understand that Inamura has got some lovely traits in terms of how he plays the ball, but he has no defensive instinct that I have seen out of all the hours of footage that I've watched. He's hesitant going into challenges. We know what happens in Scotland when you have a defender who maybe backs away from a 50-50 or even a 60-40 in his favour, and how perception takes over. And so we've often joked about on the podcast Austin Trusty and Brendan Rodgers' famous weak as piss comment that is now stuck to Trusty like glue. So although Trusty's not had a bad season, that one thing kind of defines a lot of what we think about him. Liam Scales is kind of the same. There's a perception around Liam Scales that doesn't necessarily reflect what it is he does as a player. So if we're signing a young defender who has got passing ability at Pirlo, it's exceptional, his passing ability at times. But if he's not going to be able to commit in the way that in Scotland we expect defenders to commit, that would frighten me if I was putting his name forward. And with Yamada, great season last season, but his form this season is just off a cliff. He looks like a shadow of the player this season. So I want to be really positive about these guys. I often say I want them to be successful, but when I look at the design and how we go about it, year on year, it just doesn't make any sense to me. And that bothers me, and that goes back to what we were saying previously before I got my interruption earlier on about Brendan Rodgers. I'm not overly concerned whether Rodgers is here next season. I just want to see the club build a structure where there's a design. So if Rodgers goes, we should have managers in line who would come and buy them. We should have a recruitment team that has a set structure that we can go to a new manager and say, this is what we do, and this is how we think this will work for you, and understand that process. This is a youth system that works, and this is how the process will work. But we don't have any of that, and that gets to the point where, being quite frank, it pisses me off to the extremes at times. Nygren, happy with. Kieran Tierney, obviously delighted with, but with a caveat of his season will have to be managed. And if they're looking at Kieran this season and going, we're going to get 50 games, that's a really big gamble to be taken. Ross Duhan, you're right, third choice goalkeeper. I don't want to say that he's irrelevant, but it's a signing that, let's be honest, in 3 months' time we'll probably have forgot that he was even here. And so we'll move on from there. So that's kind of my thoughts on it, and I'm going to duck out of this one because I've got a little visitor again.
She's more important. So James, green shoots of new coherence or just the same old?
Yeah, well, I found Brian's comment on the price range notable, and I understand that libel laws are different in the UK. So feel
and
free.
Dermot is very, very litigious, James.
Well, that's what I've heard. So blink twice if you agree, blink once if you disagree. We'll go to that. But so I'll say more. Is and again, this is informed by me being a lunatic fan across a variety of sports for 40 years, is when you get big egoed, meddling owners. And I have to say, Andrew Smith, and Andrew joined us earlier, and I think he said technology problems. So I was hoping to run this by him, but his appearance with Graham Spears, where they went back through some of Andrew's history with the club and the time that he interviewed Dermot Desmond, but more so Andrew's kind of firsthand understanding of Desmond's appetite for how he wants to be perceived at Celtic. And he wants to, so I'm going to, Andrew can certainly clarify this. I'm portraying what he said, and people can go listen to the interview. It was excellent on Graham Spears' pod. But that Desmond doesn't want attention. He doesn't want any of the blowback of the day-to-day poo flinging at the board that happens when, the inevitable dips occur in aggregate sentiment towards the way that the clubs run. So I suspect, and this is not Andrew that said this, I reading the tea leaves, is he's quite content being called an absentee landlord versus being called the meddlesome billionaire who doesn't know what the hell he's doing, which is how I characterize him. In the Jerry Jones of the Dallas Cowboys, or the David Tepper of the Carolina Panthers in the NFL, or Mark Cuban was in the NBA for a long stretch, where guys just can't help themselves. They get immersed in tinkering and don't let, people that know what they're doing do their jobs. So that's my sense, is that he's, and again, this is reading the tea leaves, connecting all kinds of dots across the board. Kieran Devlin, when he worked at The Athletic, doing firsthand reporting, talking to friends of Ange, Ange told them in Australia, I can't believe how involved the owner at Celtic is. You know, this is the window where we signed Joe Hart and James McCarthy, you know, who, again, if you ever watch any Ange teams play, there's no way in hell you would sign either of those players. So, so I think this is a fundamental problem, is that the entire football operations is set up to either avoid having Desmond get involved, and that incentive structure results in all of this kind of malfunction, and you don't have incentives properly aligned. So even if there are talented people in recruitment doing their jobs, if you're worried that Dermot Desmond's going to come in with some half-cocked negotiation tactic at the 11th hour, as Brian adeptly characterized, you know, and sabotage the deal, then what are we doing here? Like this, all because he gets off, you know, winning a negotiation. So I suspect as long as Desmond is doing this, and he's shown no signs of letting up that I can tell. Again, I don't have any in the know. I just connect dots from hearing a bunch of other people talk. This looks like competent people doing reasonable things below a threshold that someone doesn't have to get involved. And the problem is that inflation in the market has been such that that threshold that the old guy thinks is expensive is no longer what it was. And we're continuously having to shop in lower and lower quality brackets, which makes it harder.
So, Eddie, going to come to you. We all live in Desmond's world, and we just have to lump it, or you know, the football doctor is curing or all our ills. Which one is it?
Let's say be devil's advocate ever so slightly. If you were Dermot Desmond and you looked at our big signings last year and the money we spent last year, would you be thinking that's the way forward? Let's go in heavy for whatever reason, Harry. You know, for whatever reason that the money had to go up, and if he'll have a bias there because he'll have put the guy in place who, according to stories, has caused the prices to go up. So he'll not be wanting to accept it. That's part of the reason. But under those circumstances, if he's looking at last season and looking at Ida and he's looking at Engels. And I was particularly keen with Engels, and Ida scored 20 goals. If you want to just look at his basic return, he will think that he's not had the return on club investment that he should have got by going big. And he'll have said, do you know what? Let's just go back a step. Instead of buying 2 players at the best part of 20 million, let's buy 4 at 5 each. Let's see what happens. Let's buy 5 at 4 each. Christ, let's buy 10 at 2 each, right? And see what happens, because we've got away with it so far. Why have we went big this year when it hasn't been significantly better or different? He'll ignore the Champions League, because whilst we thought the Champions League was good, there's an argument you could say the Champions League was a success because we got a good draw, and it wasn't because we had Ida and we had Engels pulling the strings in midfield. So I'm trying my best to make a case for this year. I don't believe it. I don't agree with it. I want us to spend big all the time. But if you were him, what's the justification for adopting the transfer policy that we adopted last season again this year? Why are we not just looking for Swedish internationalists at £1.7 million? You know, why are we not looking at 25-year-old Japanese strikers who have scored 2 goals in 20 games for peanuts? And they might come good. How badly do we need them? How badly do we need them to win the league? Is he looking across the road and saying they've invested £20 million into their entire organisation, at least half of which has to go to repair their stadium? You know, and we'll be dead honest and transparent with you, but we're going to be opaque about what we're actually going to do with this £20 million and whether anyone will ever see it and how much we'll take back out of the club. And is he thinking, we don't need to do that. We can get to the Champions League. We can get kicked all over the place for those 10 games. We can pocket that money. We can increase the stability of the club and we can win the league again. Spending £20 million on 2 players was a waste of money last year. I put it to the jury that that's his thinking.
So so this is where you get in. I think of it like the chicken or the egg type of thing, which is that to me sounds like Peter Lawwell. And again, if you think about the incentive structure, the CEO in in seat for so long, and now, passively still a member of the board, not tinkering like everyone probably mentions. But again, if you're going to have a CEO that's going to take care of everything and that Desmond doesn't have to get involved that much, guess what all the signings are? A bunch of low price signings, right? So it wouldn't shock me if Desmond, as long as they're within budget and they turn a profit like they did. I mean, again, we had a negative net spend last season. So despite those two big signings, I would agree, didn't really work out. And I've found them disappointing. And I disagreed with them at the time, regardless of price, but the price just made it worse. It was like salt on the wound. I suspect he'd be fine. That doesn't, on a financial side of it, it's the interaction that he has to screw up getting the right players in, and kind of his involvement in deciding what's a good player, quote unquote, what markets should we be shopping in, the price bands, depending on the market. Like the fact that we didn't sign Kvistgaard 2 summers ago, and I don't know, but that sounds to me like a deal at that time that Desmond could have sabotaged, because it was a young guy. You're going to pay how much for a 19-year-old? Like, I could see an out of touch old owner who's meddling he plays in Denmark at what club, right? I mean, it's like, that's kind of, I could see that. I'm not saying it happened, but because those were rumors for a reason. Like, all you had to do was have some level of competency in analytics and data to see that this guy's a really good player. So he did come, it wasn't an agent recommendation, most likely. It was probably someone at the club identified him because he was jumping off the page if you looked at an analysis. So how did that deal not get done then? How didn't it get done the next window? How didn't it get done the next window? Somebody's killing it. And again, we've got enough smoke that I don't think it's because he's a bad player or it's a price level. I think this guy gets off on screwing people in negotiations. And if he doesn't get to do that, then the deals don't get closed. And again, Brian, you've been in business. Like there are people, a lot of people like that. I mean, they get off on winning a negotiation. And
yeah, and I'm pretty sure that's Dermot's. I think there's two elements of what Eddie's just spoken about, what you've just spoken about. The essential truth of the challenge at Celtic is that I don't think, I mean, if I was CEO of Celtic tomorrow, I would launch Project 2035. And Project 2035 is Celtic playing in a European final by 2035. And absolutely, getting back to Ross's point.
Can I just interrupt you before you go any further, though, Harry? This was originally Project 2030, and it was Project 2025 when you first started talking about it. It's now Project 2035.
It's always 10 years.
Eddie,
you might never live to see this.
I'm never getting the CEO's job. If you gave me the CEO's job, then then the date would stop.
Go Project 21-25, because that's as likely as anything else.
But it's like Brazil. Their greatness is always in the future.
The point being, everything would be that strategy around an end goal. And if we don't reach European final, it would be because external factors impacted on it. It'd be nothing that we'd done internally, and everything about the plan would be blah, 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 right? And I think the biggest problem at Celtic is Dermot doesn't see that is ever achievable. Now, maybe I'm Mr. Glass over half full, and maybe he's just a realist. I always think realists are pessimists hiding behind words. And I think he thinks we are going to win doubles and trebles the way we run the club at the moment domestically. And we will compete in Europe to a certain standard. And to compete at the next tier up would cost 30, 40 million quid. So we could do that once. It'd be a bit like a guy getting made redundant, then going on a bender, and the next day, okay, so he had a great weekend, but he's now got nothing left to show for it. And I think Dermot's attitude is, what's the point in blowing 30, 40 million quid to still just take Bayern Munich to extra time instead of taking them to the last 30 seconds and still get knocked out? So what is the point in blowing that cash? Because the gulf between where we're at and the next level is unbridgeable. So I think, getting back to Eddie's point of what's the point in spending the money we spent? Because the money we spent we still won a double, could have won a treble if we'd just been a bit different. Same principle, European football, okay, so we go and blow 30, 40 million quid. So I think there's that. And then I think secondly, to then just not even get some of the quality players we could get at the price we're paying. I think there's also the point you made, James, of he just likes doing a deal, and that's what he gets excited about. He just gets excited about doing a deal, and some you win and some you lose, but hey ho, we'll still win the double or the treble. And I think
so. This is as you guys have said, this is the classic case of an older or an old guy who sees everything through the lens of money, not realizing that in football, as Ross has laid out, the paradigm has shifted, and there are clubs like Brighton, Brentford, Bournemouth, and Hearts, by the way. Atalanta, our favourite one, of course, in Belgium, Royal Union, Saint-Gilloise, who are shifting that paradigm not through money but through being smart and being smart in the opposition. And I suspect we've got an owner who that wouldn't even cross their mind that is a possible direction that we could go in. So I just want to pull together some of the strands what Eddie said, and Brian and James actually, in terms of what we talked about there was, Desmond, how does he keep in his mind one step ahead of the opposition? So and we're also stuck in this paradigm here of having this owner who, there's two sides to this always, right? One is that we've got a very stable football club. As it stands at the moment, we can all pick holes in the owner. We have done the way the club's run, but we're kind of complaining around the margins a little bit. At its core, Celtic is a tremendously well-run football club if you compare it to most other football clubs, and just by certain criteria. However, the threat environment, if I can call it that, in Scotland has shifted dramatically this summer. Evolved in some cases, shifted massively in other cases. So we've seen a year into Hibernian under some level of influence of the Black Knight group who own Bournemouth that Ross mentioned there. We've seen Tony Bloom invest heavily into Hearts, and it would be naive to think that anything else but he would have a significant directional influence on how that football club runs its operations. We've seen McCormack put money into Aberdeen. I'm not sure they're run on a particular smart basis, but they're certainly a club who, from a momentum perspective, are on the up. And I think if Talline's given time, he may well build a successful team there. And then, over the other side of the city, we've got Andrew Kavanagh and the slum landlords that have taken over Ibrox, and we don't know, and neither do their own fans know, what it is that they've actually is actually running them. We don't really know what that operation is going to look like. But the point is that the threat environment for Celtic domestically has changed and shifted, and how do Celtic respond to that? And never mind the evolving threat environment in Europe, where we can play teams like Club Brugge, who have been bettered by Saint-Gilloise, and Brugge are probably ran far smarter than Celtic are, and these are the kind of peer groups that we should be comparing ourselves to. So I wanted to ask you all really about, how do you see the threat environment? Let's stick to Scotland for now. Changing in Scotland, how do you think next season's going to play out, given all those machinations and changes across all these boardrooms in our main competitors? Go on, Brian, you go first.
In the terms of the dynamic with Rangers, the principle of one of Celtic or Rangers, if you go back 20 years, winning the league by 20 points is principally because momentum in the city of Glasgow creates such an anti or negative atmosphere on the club that's not got it, that it just goes into freefall. So I wouldn't be surprised if Rangers are able to compete if they start well under the new manager, because basically all you need to be able to do to compete with us is be better than everybody else in Scottish football, and then it comes down to the 4 games. Equally, if things go badly because they've got a manager that has joined with no goodwill, if things don't start off well, it will quickly decelerate. So to then chuck in the Hearts into the mix, I think if that happens at Rangers, I could see Hearts finishing second. One of the things that somebody put to me, and James and Ross, you're better placed than me on I know Eddie's rubbish with numbers, that you two will know the stats on this. One of the things that was put to me was, everybody wants Pep Guardiola-style footballers who play nice, and you can get really good value for money if you play a more direct style of football, because direct style of football players are undervalued. And with Tony Bloom picking Derek McInnes, this person was saying that they could see Hearts playing quite a direct style of football, being able to pick up really good value for money players because nobody wants direct style of football players. They thought that Tynecastle would become an incredibly difficult place. And if they were allowed to bet on football, which they're not, they said they would put all their money on an each way bet of Hearts finishing second or third next season. And that person knows their football better than me. So I'm inclined to say that if things don't go well for Russell Martin at Rangers, I could see Hearts getting into third place. So that's my sort of overview. One other thing, I was speaking to someone an English Premiership club 2 weeks ago who was talking about the English owners are piling into Scottish football because they say it is a really, really cheap way to get European football. You can buy into Hibs and Hearts and Aberdeen for a couple of £1 million and you've got a good chance of European football. And don't be surprised to see an SPFL2 option coming up where basically there's a top league and a second league. The drawbridge is drawn up and there's about 28, 24 teams in Scottish football who get money and nobody else does because they'll start driving that idea. But anyway, that's where I see the American owners taking things.
I was going to say, I think, was that a Freudian slip? You called them English owners. They're actually all American.
Sorry, America. Yeah, sorry. Well, you know, they would have been if they hadn't chucked the T over in Boston. They'd still all be American owners paying their taxes with no representation. But yes, just a Freudian slip.
Ross, your thoughts on this? Your thoughts on the threat landscape as it's evolving in Scotland?
I think Hearts will be the most interesting of the two. If you look at Hearts and Hibs, Rangers, you've already said, we don't really know what Rangers are going to look like until it's up and running. The one thing I agree with Brian on is Russell Martin's in a really difficult position because he doesn't have that goodwill, and that goes a long way. So his start is going to probably decide a lot as to how their season pans out. Hibs is a strange one because everybody will look at last season and go, Hibs had that phenomenal run to the end of the season. That wasn't really to do with signings made or anything that really happened in January, because actually the Black Knight Group, although they went in last summer, they actually only started sending people to get involved in the sort of January, February time with a view to this window and going forward. The bizarre thing about Hibs is if you looked at them last season, they had roughly their 25-man squad if you looked at the players they were using. I can't remember offhand, but I think it was 18 of them were either contract ending or loan ending this summer. And so you're seeing them sign contracts with the likes of Rocky Bashiri, 3-year deal. There's a few others that have signed on sort of 3-4 year deals. So how much last season was a lot of these players, the penny dropping, I've not got a contract here. And as it stands, there was a lot of them that I know, because I have a few friends there, they didn't have interest from anybody because Hibs were so poor and the players were playing so badly that there's part of me that goes, was there a point in the season where David Gray's got them and went, listen guys, none of you have got any interest here, so it's either buck up your ideas and we get going and we get motor in, and momentum's carried them, and then all of a sudden players are going, I am playing for my football future here, because if we get relegated, which at one point it did look like that was a possibility, or if we don't get going, I don't know who's paying my mortgage next year. And so how much of that momentum was just basically players finally taking the finger out the backside and going, after 3 years of doing nothing, I need to do something. So we'll find that out this season. The recruitment so far, they picked up a goalkeeper for Austria who, recruitment-wise and data-wise, had a really good season. He was one of the best-rated goalkeepers in Austria last season. Raphael, I want to say Salinger, I think his name was, who was at Harterberg. And data-wise, he was really good. Seen a little bit of him. Seems a reliable goalkeeper. I think he's about 28, 29, whereas a lot of Hibs fans thought they would take... There's a young lad in the Bournemouth setup who they signed from Australia. He's about 22, 23. I think a lot of Hibs fans assumed they would loan him in and be part of that. What to me is quite clever about them taking the goalkeeper from Austria, who's 29, is if you go to Hibs at 22, 23 as a new goalkeeper and start struggling, Hibs and goalkeepers in recent years have been a bit of a nightmare. So I think they've made a sensible option. Went, do you know what, we're going to just go for a reliable set of hands. And I think that is what their methodology will be this summer, is they will try to create a sort of steady structure, and then they'll start building upon it with maybe signing younger players as time goes by. Hearts, Derek McInnes, as an Edinburgh-born boy and who lived there for 40-odd years of my life, most of my best friends are Hearts fans. They would love to tell you that they want Hearts to play silky, smooth, wonderful football. But in reality, if they try it for 2 or 3 games and it fails, the first words you hear, if we could just get back to being a tough-to-beat team, make Tynecastle a fortress, la la la. And I think that's what they've done with Derek McInnes. And again, Brian's kind of right. I think they will look to set up a team based around what Derek McInnes does quite well. Makes good structured teams. He makes them hard to beat. There's usually a fair bit of physicality in his teams. I wouldn't tag him as a long ball merchant as a manager. I do think he's got more strings to his bow than that. But he does know how to set up a nice structured team. And I think, yeah, again, next season, I don't know if I'd bet on Hearts coming second, but I think they will be a lot better than they were this season, which wouldn't be particularly hard. And I think it'll be gradually, maybe not next season, that we'll see the fruits of all these sort of data input from the Black Knight Group or from Tony Bloom. I think it'll be season 2 and season 3 that we'll see the big difference. But I do think that we will see a return to the sort of Glasgow 2, Edinburgh 2, and then the rest.
Eddie, do you think that, we'll see these clubs that are operating, perhaps, let's call it a little bit smarter, more of a philosophy and direction, and not just a bit of money, but also a bit of industry knowledge behind them? Will it mean they'll start taking points off each other and that will leave Celtic free? Or do you think Celtic, if not under threat next season, maybe the season after or the season after?
Bring me sunshine. What a cliffhanger. Just what is Eddie going to say next? I can't wait. And if you can't wait either, then you can just come off here, skip right across to the Huddlebreakdown feed, and you can listen to part 2 of this podcast. Again, don't need to subscribe or anything like that. Don't need to pay any shillings, any pounds, shillings and pence or anything. Just go to the Huddlebreakdown, listen to part 2 of the podcast. Anyway, hope you enjoyed that chat. Maybe we should do some more of that. Now remember, this is the world's longest running football fans podcast, and we are about to go into season 20. Amazing. Now, if you are already a member of the Celtic Underground community, you will know that we have just taken all your votes in for the top 10 of 24-25 season, and we are racing through on a daily basis who voted for whom to get to that number 1 spot. I wonder who could have got it. Also, we are seeking your votes for the Celtic Underground all-time Champions League 11 to commemorate our 20th anniversary. So, we've given you a list of potential keepers, defenders, midfielders, and I think the wingers and strikers are out next. So get your votes in, get them in from July the 13th, and then we'll have a series of podcasts, and we will tell the world who you said were the best Celtic Champions League performers. Anyway, that was a Huddle Breakdown. Jump over there for part 2. This is me, Harry Brady, saying good night and God bless. Good night.
Bring me sunshine.